Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Strategoi video. Ryan here. This time, we're back to doing some index reviews. We know, of course, that we're getting increasingly more battle tomes, so the index reviews are probably not something we're going to be doing all the time, but we're trying to fill the gaps that are out there, and OBR is one that I haven't seen a whole lot of presence on the YouTube, channels with thus far. So I asked, of course, Jonas to come join me. Jonas, thank you for adding to the atmosphere here with this video. I know you don't have too much experience with OBR, but what are you thinking? How are you feeling?
Yeah, I'm super excited. I actually love the index reviews the most of everything that we're doing. It's obviously fun as well to make a solo video, but there's something so I don't know, warm, I guess, about doing these videos together. And as far as OBR go, I'm actually quite excited. I had a very short foray into the OBR life. I actually have Catacross painted up. I had Archon, I had a bunch of more guests, but that was back in the day when a Catacross, Archon, and Morcast list was not actually, feasible at all.
Right.
And I sold off most of my collection. I only kept Catacross because his mold is just such an amazing piece. So
Yeah.
I'm actually excited, and I was very well. I was very familiar with the rules from previous editions, but I haven't had the chance to play against OBR in 4th edition just yet. So I'm
Yeah.
curious.
Great. It's actually been my most played army thus far, which is kind of surprising. It was my this has been the year of the skeletons for me because I dipped my toe into Tomb Kings in Old World. And even though 4th edition came a little too soon after I got that army built for me to really have put all the right amount of time in, I still am very excited to get back to those guys. And then OBR, once I saw that War Scroll, I think you remember the moment for the Mortek
Oh
Crawler.
yeah.
I was immediately, oh, this is my army now. So
GW hurt the cash flow.
yeah,
Going.
right.
Yep.
So now I've got too many of them, and I need to sell one away. But anyway, let's get rolling because I think we're on a time limit here.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, guys, don't forget to hit the like, share, and subscribe, and all the normal YouTube stuff. Okay, so as per usual, we're going to be looking at the battle traits, the enhancements, the war scroll breakdown of 6 different war scrolls before moving on to some army list and some concluding thoughts. I'm going to be following this up right away with, just like we did with Lumineth and Ideneth, with breakdowns for basically the big guys, the infantry, and then the more elite or cavalry type units in 3 separate videos where I go through every war scroll and look at the math on all of them. So get ready for those if you're an OBR fan. So, but this one's going to be more kind of overarching. So let's start with the battle traits, which center entirely around relentless discipline. Now, Jonas, do you remember how this used to be set up back in like 2nd edition?
Oh yeah, you got a bunch of relentless discipline points or whatever they were called. They were
Yeah.
sort of command points, I suppose. And before we had command points back then, and you got to use them on these abilities, and it was such a cool thing. I remember when they were designed that way, I was so hyped about it because you could just really imagine how every Warhammer player wants to feel like a commander of a full-blown army, doling out commands. So yeah, that was really cool. And I think a lot of 3rd edition or 2nd edition, sorry, was based on that on a principle, right?
Well, yeah, the command point system from 3rd edition, you had it right the first time, was based on the 2nd edition book
There we go.
of
Yeah.
OPR.
Yep.
Yeah, and then unfortunately, what happened is once we moved over to 3rd edition, OBR lost access to basically all of it,
Hmm.
really, until they got their book. And then their book gave them basically 1,000,000 command points. And then, of course, now we're in a new world where they're trying to restrict the way command points work. So you're basically getting these auras that feel like you're using command points, but they're not eating a typical resource. They're not that different from using some of the other army abilities, a bit Lumineth-esque. There's some other armies that have like a once per turn kind of thing you
Yeah.
choose. And that's kind of the vibe. When we go through these, what we're going to be doing is looking at each one. They're sorted by which phase they happen. So we're looking at movement phase, charge phase, and then combat phase. And all the ones on the left, if I'm not mistaken, are the more assertive or offensive ones, and all the ones on the right are defenses. So we're going to oscillate back and forth between offensive and defensive within a given phase. And I have some pop-up bubbles. So Jonas, you're commanding
The
the
PowerPoint master
relentless
over here.
PowerPoint. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and hit that first one. So in the movement phase, and I put any special notes here, but your turn only. So because it's, out of all these abilities, the movement phase ones are the only ones that specify that it has to be in your turn. So we'll talk about how that applies later. But you are um, giving an offensive buff of +2 inch move to characteristic for all the units that are wholly within 12 of a given hero at the moment of issuing this relentless discipline ability. Now, that's a lot to unpack. First off, all of these abilities are built around a hero using them. So as soon as your heroes die, it's over. No more battle traits for you. Second, um, they're all 12-inch bubbles and all wholly then, but this one's a pulse, and we'll come back to that one later. But the rest of them apply while you're still standing around the guy at the moment that you need to use it, basically. Um, and then the other thing to keep in mind here is, unlike how it used to work with kind of like command points where you could use it multiple times per turn in third edition, now you're giving it off and it's hitting. It's only around one hero. There's like one exception for the Harbingers, Morghast Harbingers, and there's another hero which would be Catacross, which has a bigger bubble. But otherwise, you're picking basically one hero, 12-inch bubble. That's it. So let's take a look at some of these little notes that I put on the screen. This is the only relentless discipline ability with a pulse, which means it applies to all eligible units at the moment of using it instead of buffing units while they stay in the bubble, which means you can move your chosen hero that's going to use it first without them getting the buff themselves. So they're not getting +2 inch movement. And then they get into a place where they pulse out to affect the units you really want to impact. This gives a lot of preference to heroes that are particularly fast, so they can go shift who's getting the buff or not. Jonas, you got any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, it's amazing. I really like this one. It reminds me, as a Lumith player, we have the Speed of His spell now as a spell you can keep on casting, and it adds 3 to your movement, and that's obviously an inch more, but it's you need to succeed on a casting roll, and your opponent can't have unbounded by then. But this is just automatically happens. Obviously, you're sacrificing your movement phase relentless discipline, but yeah, it's very, very cool. It affects everything. So I mean, I can imagine wanting to huddle around a hero and then having your entire army popping off turn 1 or turn 2 even, and just spreading out around the board.
Yeah, so Speed of Hish, if I'm not mistaken, is actually +4 inches because it was effectively doubling the Stone Guard.
Oh, is it +4? Man, wow.
Yeah, it was 4. But in any case, and keep in mind that we've separated these into 6 different abilities, but you get to use one of each phase ability. So you get to use one movement, one charge, and one combat. So
Yep.
it's not even that you have to choose one of the 6. You're choosing 3 abilities per turn. Well, on your turn, 3 abilities. On your opponent's turn, max 2. So it's pretty flexible that way too. But yes, I would agree this is a really good standard setting. And then when we were talking about the movement formation, I think it was with Caleb, or the what's it called with the Seraphon asterism you can choose. The +2 inch
Oh yeah,
move
yeah.
is like such a great ability. Now this is not for your whole army, so they have to keep around those heroes. But I still think this is a fantastic ability,
Yeah,
especially with some of your troops being so slow.
yeah, and in certain ways, this is even better because you get to adapt to whatever you need every turn.
Right. Okay, so let's go on to the defensive ability, which would be Reform Ranks. This is basically giving a retreat and charge. And you go ahead and put up the bubble for me, the pop-up box, because I have some notes on this one too. Yeah. So though this ability is used during the movement phase, it only applies to units effectively while they are eligible around that hero in the charge phase. Meaning that you have to have good foresight into where your units need to go and choose the right hero for the job. Maybe that's a lot to unpack, but imagine what happens. In your movement phase, you say, this is the hero that is going to use this ability. And it does project 12-inch Holy Then Bubble off of that hero. But it checks for the applicability of that ability in the charge phase.
Yep.
So your units can be somewhere else totally different on the field, as long as your hero can get to the point where that hero, say within an auto run of 6 inches or something, you put them over there, and now they're Holy Then 12 when they need to charge. They'll still have been able to have retreated and then charged. So you need to have some foresight on that. But Keep in mind, one of the strongest units in our book right now has a impact. Well, they do have impact hits, but more importantly, they get +1 damage on the charge, which is the Kavalos Death Riders. And so a lot of people think I'm going to tie up this unit so that they lose half of their output, their charge output, but not really. All you do is just make sure you got a hero in the neighborhood and let them get out, and then they come back in and do some damage. Jonas, what are you thinking?
Yeah, it's I think it's actually easier to use than you would think. I mean, I totally agree. Obviously, you have to plan ahead a little bit, but wholly within 12 inches depends on the unit, of course. But usually, you keep your heroes or a lot of your heroes a little bit closer to the front ranks anyway, right? Or they move with your army anyway. I think it's easier to use for your infantry stuff because most of your units can keep up with those, while the other stuff, I mean, especially for OBR, I suppose, a lot of your heroes want to stay behind their infantry stuff. But yeah, it's super nice. Retreat and charge always surprises people. Always.
Yeah. And they do, it's worth pointing out, I should have put this in the notes too, but they do take damage when they retreat. A lot of times when we see a retreat and charge ability, it'll also say they don't. So they do take D3 damage. So you pay that penalty.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's go on to the charge phase. Speaking of charging, so this is a 1-2 punch we see a lot. The offensive ability here is a +1 to charge, and that's also like the rest of these that aren't the very first one we looked at. Bubbles, they're auras. So you pick a hero, and then from that point on, you're giving out +1 to charge in that charge phase. I mean, for all the OBR units around them. Obviously, this is great if you just need to guarantee that you get in. And keep in mind, we've got it's either a heroic trait or an artifact that gives -2 to charge for enemy units. So there's a really good chance that you're going to have the advantage when it comes to making sure you get the charge off if you're both trying to play the who's going to charge who game. Interestingly enough, go ahead and put the next bubble up. I think maybe it says this point in there. So though just like reform ranks, which was the retreat and charge ability, it applies to charging, they could have been triggered off of 2 separate heroes, unlike the 2 movement phase abilities. So that's a separate point. So off of 2 separate heroes. So what do I mean by that? Well, one hero could have given the bubble for retreat and charge, and then if for some other reason you need it somewhere else, you can pop, because obviously if you had retreated, a lot of times you're just retreating to just outside 3 inches. You don't really need a +1.
Mm-hmm.
So then you could have a different unit trigger the +1 to charge in a different part of the battlefield. So these don't have to always be around the same hero. That said, if we're playing a low drop game right now, you usually have 1 to 3 heroes on the table max. So a lot of times it is going to be the same hero. But lastly, it's also good. Like I said in the second point here, unlike the other 2 movement phase abilities, or the 2 movement phase abilities, this and all the remaining 3 abilities can also be used in your opponent's turns, which means you can get a +1 to charge on a counter charge, which is pretty cool. So, a lot of times the counter charge, they have to be extra careful about that because there's always the threat that you're going to pop this ability off first and then get an 8-inch charge instead of a 9 or whatever it is that they're worried about. Jonas, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it just occurred to me that these battle traits are only as good as the amount of heroes that you can bring, right? Like, I actually don't know what the battle roster for OBR looks like hero-wise, as in, do you guys have a lot of the italics heroes, as we like to call them, the lieutenants?
The one guy that can come along is the Liege Kavalos, who is fast.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good one, yeah.
Yeah. So
that's the only one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But yeah, still a good ability. But yeah, just something that occurred to me that in my head, it looks like you could be popping off these abilities all over the board, but it's probably only at 2 spots.
Yep. So you got to be careful. There's a lot of tactical thinking with OBR, which is one of the reasons it fits better with my playstyle than the rest of the Death armies. Okay, so let's go to Counter-Strike, the defensive version of a charge phase ability. If you choose this one instead of the other one, all of the units that are wholly within 12 inch of the hero that chooses it for the rest of that turn in melee, so which is obvious because it's triggered in the charge phase and no shooting is after the charge phase, are getting anti-charge +1 Ren while they're wholly within 12 inches of that hero.
Nice.
So go ahead and pop the bubble up, and we got a couple points here. So it only applies versus any units that actively charge this turn. It doesn't mean that if they were in combat with a unit already and then another unit charged, that then they get +1 rend. It only would be against against the old unit, I mean, that was standing there. It only applies to units that actually did charge this turn. It also doesn't apply to companion attacks. So, like Archon's beast that he's riding on doesn't get it, and the Kavalos Death Riders horses don't. But honestly, the Death Riders horses aren't that great. And then it also can't stack with the same ability on Mortek Guard, because they cleared this up with rules errata or whatever, that if it literally says the exact same thing, anti-charge +1 rend, which the Mortek Guard already have, you can't get +2. They have clarified that if it said anti-hero and anti-monster, both of which are +1 rend, then if there were both of those things, they would get both. But this is not that kind of thing, because it's literally the same wording. So it doesn't apply to Mortek Guard, which is totally fine.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I think that also would have counted if it was, let's say, anti-charge +2 rend, right? You just, if it's anti and then the same word, you have to choose one of the two abilities.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. How are you feeling about this one?
Yeah, I mean, this one is tried and tested, right, for OBR players?
Well, obviously you always want to be charging, which helps with your retreat and charge. But the good news is with these abilities is usually you're in one of two situations. You either want the first one or the second one. And if you're already stuck in combat, obviously this is the no-brainer, because there's no charging you're going to be doing.
Yep.
And so then you're just, say your Death Riders are going from -1 rend to -2, which you're not complaining about, right?
Yeah.
So I haven't used it as much as I've used the +1 to charge, I don't think. Or a lot of times the unit that did charge me is not necessarily the one that I want to attack. So if it just meant I got +1 rend on a turn when someone charged me, then I think it would come up a little bit more often. But certainly if you get stuck, it's a great ability to have.
Yeah. Do you think that's because we live in an age in the rule set now where cavalry is just all around, and cavalry always wants to be charging?
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like kind of an arms race for who has the best way to guarantee an alpha strike of some sort. Not necessarily in turn one, but that they get to determine the order in which you're fighting. And I mean, the good news is your army is already really defensive in general. And this just helps make you a little more punchy if you do happen to get stuck, which, as we know from any cavalry unit that's better on the charge, getting stuck is the best way to turn them off. And this is at least helping make up for some of that. So,
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a look at the last two. So these would be combat phase abilities. So the offensive one is every unit that's wholly within 12 inches of that hero gets +1 to wound in combat. There's not a whole lot to say about this. I'm not even 100% sure I have a bubble that pops up on this, because it's just pretty straightforward. It wouldn't apply to companion attacks, so maybe I said something about that. Do we have a bubble that pops up? Yes.
We do.
Doesn't apply to companion attacks, and has minimal impact on the Morghast units, both of them, and one of the Gothizzar Harvesters profiles, because they already have a 2+ to wound.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That said, if you're getting a -1 to wound somewhere for some reason, then it would negate that, saying keep it on the 2+. But so you're mainly seeing this, like, it seems good, but the other thing you're trading is just so much better most of the time. Let's look at the other one, then we'll talk about this one. So Impenetrable Ranks is the defensive, and it's giving a 5+ ward for all your units wholly within 12 of that hero. And this is any combat phase, so it could be every combat phase.
Yeah.
So all of your units have a built-in 6+ ward, and the only one that has a 5 automatically is Nagash, I think. Even Archon and Catacross only have a 6. Now, you can improve your ward by +1 for heroes by standing within combat range of an Immortus Guard unit, but then they end up like taking the wounds for you if you fail it or roll 1. It's one or the other. I think it's just rolling 1s. But anyway, this would bump those heroes up to a 4+ ward, which of course is even better, because they would have a 5+ from this ability, and then the Immortus Guard gives +1 to that roll. And that also would apply to Nagash, by the way. So this ability is just so good, because we don't have a whole lot of strike first, strike last going on here. And eventually your guys are going to get hit. And having a 5+ ward is literally warding off twice as many damage points coming in as a 6+ ward. So even though a +1 to wound is kind of nice, I really ultimately feel like the 5+ ward is your go-to, and only choose for the +1 to wound if it's going to make that difference between getting hit back at all. The best defense is a good offense kind of mentality. What are you thinking?
Yeah, it's amazing. My head goes straight to Catacross straight away, increasing the range on this from 12 to 18, and then adding his command ability on top, where you add +1 to save rolls.
Yep.
I mean, wow. Do
Yeah.
a lot of competitive Ossiarch Bonereaper lists not include Catacross?
Well, we're going to talk about it. He's one of my 6 units, but
Yeah,
I would say
I'm excited.
the big problem is that he's expensive and isn't a caster.
All right.
And he's not fast,
Mm.
but he makes up for it with that big old bubble and his great abilities. So there's a big trade-off, but we'll get to him in a bit.
Yeah.
The other thing to think about maybe on this is that this is only in the combat phase. So if you were thinking, oh, well, I've got access to a 5-up ward, the OBR armies are a lot more sensitive to shooting phase stuff.
Yeah.
So, and of course, anything that happens in the hero phase. But then again, with Archon's ability, not. So we'll come back to that later. But overall, how are you feeling about these battle traits?
Yeah, I think it's very fun. It's still very thematic. I believe if you used to play Bone Reapers, you still kind of get what you wanted out of the army, at least as far as battle traits go. Obviously, you're not just spending all of your discipline points willy-nilly. Now you have to actually decide. But I do feel like it's easier to understand and less of a feel bad for your opponent as well. And I think we need to keep that in mind every time that we look at the battle traits of an army, especially if it's an army that we really love ourselves. Would opponents enjoy playing against this army more as well? And I think if both you and your opponent enjoy it more, I think it's a good rule set. So far, I'm quite happy about how things are shaping up.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the system. It's once you learn it, it's not super complicated, and you really do feel like it leans in on the tactical mastery part that Catacross and the rest of the army's lore brings to the table. And a lot of our profiles are the elf profile, 3s to hit, 4s to wound, which makes me feel like this is kind of like they resurrected elf bones instead of, say, dwarf bones or human bones, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
But it's kind of got that Lumineth-y feel, but in a death kind of army.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's personally I would have preferred this system over the Lumineth system, and that's not necessarily because I play Lumineth. I just love having to decide every movement phase rather than for a full round.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so let's move on to the next set of rules that we're looking at, which would be formations.
Yeah.
Oh, hold on. Let's go back to that real quick.
Do you want to cover that about the Immortus cards?
I forgot that was there. Yeah. Impenetrable Ranks doesn't benefit Nagash because he already has a 5-up, or units affected by his Warscroll spell ward, which he can give out. But it does stack with Immortus card +1 to ward, which I already said. Okay, cool. We're caught up.
Okay.
All right. Battle formations. So we can go ahead and look at Mortisan Council. So this one is +1 to casting rolls for friendly Ossiarch Bonereapers infantry wizards. If you hit the next slide there, it's going to pop up with a box of who the wizards would be. So that's going to be Vok Mortian, who's your unique Mortisan. He's a 2-caster, along with his buddy, the Mortisan Soul Mason. And then you got 3 1-casters in the Bone Shaper, Soul Reaper, and Ossiffector. And I think I listed them in decreasing points cost at time of recording. So this is the default setting if taking mainly Mortisans for casting and not leaning into other builds, because +1 to cast, as we all know, is just great right now. And what I said about Catacross is a lot of times you can't take Catacross and Archon, who is our best, like, not Nagash wizard, I guess. And they're just too expensive together. And then you're having to take some combination of these guys, depending on how many drops you're willing to have and how many points you've got to spend on it. And getting +1 to cast on all these kind of makes up for the fact that Archon's not there, who also has a +1 to cast built into his Warscroll. What do you think about this?
Yeah, it's clean, it's fun. I would love this on a casting army. I'm not sure how often that you're using this, if you're running the named heroes as you said. But yeah, it's fun.
Yep. Okay, so let's go on to the Crawlers faction, or formation, the Mortek Ballistari. So basically, in your shooting phase, and only in your shooting phase, you can pick up to 3 Mortek Crawler units wholly within friendly territory. So some missions are going to punish this more than others, but in the current GHB, a very significant amount of the missions are half of the battlefield that's wholly within your territory. So that's going to be fine. And they haven't used a move ability this turn. They can teleport, however, with the bridge, which is foreshadowing for later, and still use this. Add 1 to hit rolls for each target shooting attacks. Now, that might sound like not that great, but even if you only take 1, it's already saving you a CP for all out attack. And if you're taking more than that, then obviously you're just spreading it over multiple units and getting some value. I will admit a 3 crawler list right now with current points is probably not the best build, even though I have them. I think 2 is this 2 is the sweet spot if you're trying to make this happen. So that's why I say great if leaning into 2+ catapults. It's questionable with only 1, but 3+ is probably overkill. Any thoughts on this? I mean, obviously we need to look at the catapult first to really have an idea, but thus far we haven't seen a whole lot of armies that lean into war machines and have a whole
Exactly.
connection.
That's what I
Yeah,
was gonna say. I love these kind of abilities that kind of make you look differently at a unit. Um, from one point of view, I would wish that it was just included on every War Machine's War Scroll. That if they haven't moved, they just get +1 hit because it makes sense
yeah,
lore flavor wise.
yeah,
But apart from that, I really love that they give the Ballistari some love because they were so good when they came out, and then they got nerfed so hard for such a long time. You didn't
yeah,
see them at the table at all. And I really hope. I mean, I know from talking to you about them that it makes them worthwhile, and I also know that most siege units usually have big damage numbers, but once you miss with one of those attacks, it really hurts your unit's efficiency.
yeah,
So having that
yeah.
+1 to hit is better than it looks on if you would compare with other types of units, I think.
Yeah, and I like this is the only way you really get shooting in this army.
Yeah.
And so, unlike other armies that can lean into reinforcing a unit and getting like returned extra value because you use an all-out attack on a big block of 20 guys or something, you can't do that you can't reinforce these guys because they're single models, and so you really need an ability like this to actually make it feel like you brought a unit of 2 or 3 of these guys. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the Kavalos Lance. I would say this might be the most popular one, especially considering the trending popularity of Death Riders
I
right
hadn't
now.
even checked it out, and I already knew that, just from a
Right,
gut feeling.
right. So it's a once per battle army, but don't let that fool you. That's just in the deployment phase, and that's obviously how this would work. You pick up to 3 OBR cavalry units to be the targets, and each can make a 6-inch move, but cannot move into combat. So if you hit the next button there, we're going to see a box of what the cavalry units are. And that's just the Kavalos Death Riders, the Liege Kavalos, who's the generic version of the guy on horse, and the Arch Kavalos Xantos, the named variant. I compare those 2 heroes actually quite a lot to the Acalian King and Volturnos in Ideneth. They have a very similar kind of difference in what they bring to the table.
Yeah.
But anyway, those are the 3 cavalry units. So it's not Archon, it's not your Morghast units, but what this means for some missions is that because it's a deployment phase ability and it's 6, a lot of times if you deploy right on the line, you can move that unit up onto an objective, and because it checks which objectives you hold, the one exception to when it checks is at the beginning of the game, at the end of the deployment phase. So it would see that you have those objectives, and then you can just, in your turn, if you have to go first, just walk back off of them so you're back in a defensive stance. So you can line up that counter charge or regular charge, the counter attack, for another turn, and you still have the objectives, and they have to come to you, which is really strong. And having 3 units that can do that, you can even move a hero up with them, right? You can get yourself better in place for take the flanks. There's all kinds of stuff you can do with this to help get them. And if you put a big block of 10 guys up, you could be putting 30 Kavalos Death Riders 6 inches extra up the table, and then the next turn be giving them +1 to charge and 2-inch extra movement. So functionally, you just gave them 9 inches of free movement in getting across the table that some other unit with a 10-inch move characteristic wouldn't be able to have access to. So I said it's the other default setting, especially considering the current strength of Death Riders.
Mm-hmm.
Even 1 unit moving like this is solid. Because we see that on plenty of War Scrolls that it makes a War Scroll decent just because it's got a pregame move. Jonas, what are you feeling about this?
Yeah, I mean, this looks very much like the one battle formation that Sylvan has for the Buck Riders.
Mm-hmm.
I believe they also have a pre-battle move or post-deployment phase move. Yeah, and you just don't see that in their army because the Bug Riders are actually quite lackluster. But as long as the Death Riders are useful or cheap enough, either one or both, preferably for the OBR players, obviously. Yeah, I can definitely see this being good for all the reasons that you mentioned.
So I'm looking at the Sylvaneth rules right now. That is what it was in 3rd edition that they had the pregame move, but they've changed it to like a Sylvaneth cavalry have run and charge.
Oh, damn.
So,
Well,
yeah,
I
it
mean,
used to be that. But you're
yeah.
remembering correctly that was the thing they had.
Guys, if you've noticed that in the past couple of comments that I made, I keep mixing up additions. It's because I haven't been keeping up with my AoS knowledge the last couple of weeks. I feel so out of it. I'm really happy that I get to, rejuvenate my AoS knowledge with Ryan here today.
Happy to be there, and I wouldn't worry about it too. If I'm in games, a lot of times if I'm playing an army I haven't gotten a lot of experience against, I'll be like, does it still do this?
Yeah,
You
I
get
mean,
used to that.
I used to spend at least an hour, I think, per day just doing some AoS work, I suppose, reading up or watching videos. And now I haven't been doing that all that much, so it kind of mixes up in my head a little bit. But it's still fair to say that back then, even when they had the pregame move, it was actually used quite often then. But because Bug Riders had their time in the sun a little bit at that time. So yeah, I mean, just as it was good for them back then, it's good for the OBR right now.
Sure, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, we got one more battle formation.
Yeah.
That'll be the Mortek Phalanx, and this is clearly the loser. Once per turn, army, so in your movement phase, 5 times per game, you pick a friendly Mortek guard unit that's been destroyed. On a 5-up, you bring back half, rounding up, outside of 9 from all enemy units.
Damn.
Now, it is cool that it can be anywhere on the battlefield, but a 5-up is so brutal on a unit that doesn't mean a whole lot to you. And half a unit is like, I think they're 120 points or 110. I'll have to look that up, but you're talking about in the neighborhood of 240 points, and to get the max value out of this, and the chance that it goes off in one game, considering that you're probably not losing a block of 20 Mortek guard within the first 2 turns because they're unrendable. And then you've got a 6 or maybe 5-up ward on them. The chances that you're actually losing them on time to actually have enough chances to roll a 5-up. Let's say you have max 3 turns to do this. You're bringing 1/2 unit back of your arguably worst, like regular unit in the game. Yeah, they're 120 points right now, so 240 for a big block. I just don't see why they chose if this said your enemy's movement phase, that would be kind of interesting. Then you could have some strategic value there, or any movement phase.
Yeah,
or if it was on
once
a
per game and just guaranteed.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I just don't. There are ways to bring back models in this unit. You've got like the Bone Shaper can help bring back models. The Gothazar Harvester still brings back models to this unit. But leaning into that build to me seems like a losing proposition. Let's put it this way. I wrote a Mortek Guard spam list, which, by the way, I only put 40 in because I wanted to have the right other things to go along with them. And even then, I still chose Mortek Council. Because I wanted the +1 to cast on things, and I thought it'd be way more useful than this maybe goes off ability. So, especially if you keep bringing the models back, there's even less of a chance that they're going to kill it on time.
Yep.
And then say you only try to use this ability once or twice, there's a good chance you never get it. So, I don't get why they wrote it like this, but honestly, it's not my play style anyway, using like spam of like small dudes. So, I'm okay with it. You got any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, it's just very lackluster. There's a bunch of stuff that you could do to this ability to just make it a little bit more appealing, but none of that's happened so far.
Yeah, if it said infantry, it would change the whole situation for me. Because then it would open up the Morghast, the Immortus Guard, the Necropolis Stalkers, but it unfortunately not.
Yep.
Okay, so let's move on to some other traits we got here. So we're going to look at the faction terrain. We'll go through this one real quick. It's almost useless. It's a beautiful big model, and I really enjoyed painting it, but it often doesn't get put on the table because it's just too big. It's the same problem that a lot of terrain pieces have, that it gets in the way. You can't make it smaller. Some people, if they run big terrain pieces, it just literally doesn't fit anywhere but a corner. And then when it goes off, it's only your hero phase. You pick a visible enemy unit within 18, which isn't that far, because usually it's stuck in a corner somewhere, and only goes off on a 4. But then you have 4 abilities to go through. So let's scroll to the next one here. We'll focus on the first one. You're subtracting 1 from hit rolls for the target, including shooting attacks, until the start of your next turn. Great ability,
Yeah.
but it's probably off in a corner somewhere. So if it still had a rule where you could lift a terrain piece or like choose a terrain piece somewhere else on the board to get rid of it and put it in an optimal place, maybe it should at least have a 24-inch range and maybe be on a 3-up like it used to kind of be if models died
Yeah,
around
or
it.
they could do the Seraphon approach where uh, the closer you get to the terrain piece, the easier it is to use its ability.
Sure. Because this is supposed to be where all of the people that they're
Yeah,
like, if you don't
exactly.
know, in the lore, the OBR is basically the mafia,
Yeah.
and they're saying, well, they say we'll protect you, but you've got to sacrifice a certain
Yeah.
number of bones to
Yeah.
us, and this is where the people bring the bones. So
Yeah,
anyway,
it's never been its rules have never reflected its flavor, to be honest.
no,
I wish there was more of a tithe feeling, but it's like it's more like it punishes you for not bringing a tithe.
sure, exactly, yeah. Okay, so let's look at punishment of ignorance. The next one is subtract 1 from casting and or chanting rolls for the target until the start of your next turn. Not unbinding and not banishing. I feel like if you're going to have this be the only thing it does, that you would need to have it do all of them. Just because I don't know if I'm really picking a wizard for this. I mean, depends on what wizard. If it's like a wizard that's got 4 casts or something, then sure. But and then most priests are only doing it 1 chant, and then it can still go off. They just save up their
Yeah,
points. So I'm not a huge fan of this one,
me
but
neither.
I suppose in certain situations it
Yeah,
can
it
make a
depends on
difference.
the armor list, I suppose.
Yeah. Okay. Punishment of lethargy. Have the target's movement characteristic until the start of your next turn. This is the best one because that can really turn some turn some units off. Like imagine Fire Slayers with a 4-inch move. Now they're going 2. It's really punishing. Or even some cavalry units are not going to get that charge guaranteed if they're turned down to, I don't know, 6 inches instead of 12. So I feel like this is one of the go-tos. Maybe also with the -1 to hit, depending on what you're targeting. If they've got a base 4 up to hit, then that's amazing. But if they've got a base 2, it's a lot less impressive because of the way the math works out on that.
Yeah.
And then lastly, the D3 mortal damage is the next one. And obviously that's some chit damage, but it only goes off on a 4+. So,
Yeah.
it is what it is. Jonas, do you have a favorite on this list?
I mean, halving the movement is just amazing, always. And Punishment of Agony can be really strong depending on what unit that you're using it on. They're all actually kind of good, but at the same time, they're just so restricted by the fact that it's only 18 inches. The terrain piece is so big that you usually can't place it anywhere near the edge of your zone because, I mean, you're not going to be able to move around it. And then it's only on a 4+. It just does 2 little things to be useful.
Yep. I think most OBR players would admit that, at least competitive players would admit that they almost never get this on the board, or if they do, it's in very specific situations. So.
I would really love for this terrain piece to have specifically a rule that it replaces a terrain piece on the table, a non-faction terrain piece, because that would just be flavorful, right? You're not bringing your stuff, you're fighting around your bone tithe next because some guy hasn't paid its tithe points, I suppose.
Right.
And you're punishing them. One
of the problems is that it's not only big in terms of placing it, but a lot of your units don't fly, which means they can't get over it. I have largely used it in my castle army with protecting the catapults as just a no-go zone for the opponent. It's just a barrier that I put on the right or left side of my army to wall it off. That's probably honestly been more helpful than anything else. But it is, of course, giving your opponent a charge target as well.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if it said that you can charge it or something like that, that would make it more interesting. Then you could actually use it as a screen or something like that. But yeah.
Or Jonas, why doesn't the guy get to fight with a sword? Like if you got in combat with
that would be so cool.
That would be amazing if he was like a monster profile and it really punished someone for getting close to it.
That'd be really badass.
What a missed opportunity. Okay, let's move on though. So we're looking at our enhancements. We'll be doing all of the things you can choose. Obviously, with spell lores, you're not choosing a spell lore anymore, but you could choose the manifestation lore. And then heroic trait and artifact is one time per army until they change the way this works. So let's look at the heroic traits. Okay, diversionary tactics. It's a passive ability. Subtract 2 from charge rolls for enemy units while they're within 12 inches of this unit. Amazing. This can stop so much BS going on that's going to come break up your castle or deny you the ability to get the charge off, or even if you're playing catapults, to make it so that they turn off your catapult by being in combat because it doesn't have shoot in combat. -2 from charge rolls can be a make and break deal. Let's go through all of them, and then we'll talk about what your favorites are. So then Aura of Sterility is a wholly within 12-inch bubble from the bearer or the hero themselves of -1 to wound for shooting attacks. So depending on the meta, this could be really strong. And then the last one is Mighty Archaeosian. If the unmodified hit roll for an attack that targets that unit, including shooting attacks, is a 1, 2, or 3, the attack fails and sequence ends. In Ideneth, we had that for combat attacks only.
I was just going to say, does your inner Ideneth wake up by reading that?
Well, to be fair, the unit you're probably putting on an Ideneth is a melee unit. And so, that's when they most need it. And keep in mind, the units that can take these are pretty much just the 4 non-unique Mortisan foot guys, and then the Liege Kavalos, the guy who's on the horse. So even though this is good, the first 2 abilities are just so much better, especially the first one. What are you feeling?
Yeah, I mean, both the 2 first abilities just appear obviously strong. Like the first one does wonders against most armies, I think, because most armies at least have 1 unit or 2 that really want to get into combat with you, if not more. Even a shooting army usually has that 1 unit that wants to be in combat, right? Whereas the second ability obviously protects you from all the shooting stuff that's going around right now, and especially with all the extra shooting from cover fire, that would actually also work against that, right?
Yep.
Yeah, but I still think I would prefer the first ability. The only thing that I'm thinking of is, let's say you're running 2 Mortisan heroes. How often are they within range to have to apply that debuff to enemy units?
Well, the thing is, if you have any army at all worth talking about, you're going to have to be slowly progressing up the field, even with those heroes.
Yeah.
And so you're usually moving with a castle because you're projecting those 12-inch bubbles, or with Catacross an 18-inch bubble. And then you've got to have some kind of hammer that's going to get in there. And all of your best hammers tend to be, the Archai and Harbingers, the Morghast units, are also hammers, but they're really weak to getting attacked first.
Yep.
And so you've got to be real sensitive about the timing of the engagements. And I think this helps you control that flow a lot more, even with a little foot hero that's not able to get up the field as fast. If you just have them 3.5 inches outside of your front line, and then that means anything that's within around 9-ish inches is getting that charge roll really reduced, which can be even punishing for a 3-inch charge, by the way. That can make a difference.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Anyway, I think I get what you're saying, but we don't have a whole lot of options to put it on. It depends on what your matchup is. If you got to choose into a shooting army and you knew you were going to shooting army, then obviously the second one. But in general at tournaments, I think the melee type stuff has been way rougher and more valuable, so that you can control the pacing.
Yeah, the second one is just all around useful, but the first one can actually really shut down certain play styles, I think.
Yeah, and it takes a whole turn out of their toolkit of fighting.
Yeah,
And
you still have some effectiveness from a ranged unit shooting into the Aura of Sterility, but you don't get any effectiveness from a unit that doesn't make its charge, I suppose.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so artifacts. So first up, once per battle, any combat phase, so it could be in your opponent's. For the rest of the turn, if the unmodified hit roll for a combat attack that targets the bearer is a 1 or a 2, inflict 1 mortal damage on the attacking unit after the fight ability has been resolved. So they could still be hitting on a 2, right? Because obviously never on a 1. But then it's got a lot of splashback stuff, and I think this even applies. I think all these rules that are written this way applies even before the guy, even if the guy dies. So you're at least, if they go weight of dice into a hero, then it could be doing a lot. But again, these abilities that are putting a buff on one dude instead of focusing on your army in general is less my thing. But let's look at the other two real quick. So Load of Saturation, it just gives them a 5-up ward, which then means you could buff it with a more discard to a 4-up, which is always nice. Granted, there is some overlap with what you're getting if you choose the defensive combat feasibility for 5-up ward. So this would be, if you would go for that every time, then this is only helping in against spells with mortal damage, and then in like things that are doing like charge impact hits and shooting attacks. But it's still good, especially if the guy that it's on is very crucial to what you're trying to get off. But I really feel like the next ability is the one you want. Helm of Tyranny. Subtract 2 from the control scores of enemy units while they're within 12 of this unit, which means in a relatively elite army, you're really debuffing them, especially if you've Catacross by, because he's adding +3 to all of your units, and you're subtracting 2 from all their units, and it can end up meaning a huge swing in control score capability, or that you get to keep an objective that otherwise you shouldn't. So because it's a big bubble, and because it impacts the effectiveness of your army and in general, this tends to be my favorite. But I could see some argument for the other two, especially the war. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, usually I hate once per battle abilities, but the first one seems so much fun. Like, oh, you want to kill my small hero? Here you go. Die. But yeah, I don't know. I think I would probably agree with you that the last one is the one that you would get the most bang for your buck out of. I mean, if you look at Sylvaneth list, for example, they have a battle formation that does something akin to this, and it's very popular. Also because they're very elite. So in elite lists, I can definitely see this being very useful.
Yeah. So we could talk about the applications for the other two if we look at some other heroes, or if not, I'll talk about it in some other videos later.
Yeah.
But let's move on to the spell lores.
Yeah.
So we'll start with the actual spell lore that all the wizards just know. So our unlimited spell, and this is when we were talking about Mortis and Council, where this really comes into play, because if you only take Archon once, and he's your only caster with a 3 caster with a +1, you can only cast this spell once because it's unlimited, but that's how unlimited works. However, if you take 3 1 casters or a 2 caster and a 1 caster, you're getting 2 to 3 in Mortis and Council. You're getting the same number of casts, but now you can cast this 2 to 3 times. And this takes your, basically, too long didn't read, all of your units that aren't companion attacks, almost all of the profiles, melee profiles, have unmodified 6. So crit hits do exploding hits. So crit 2 hits. And this is turning it from a 6 to a 5, which is functionally taking it mathematically from a +1 to hit to a +2, but with more variance. And of course, you can't usually get +2 to hit. And if you stack that with an all-out attack, then you're getting up to functionally +3 to hit, which is insane, which often means that you're getting 7/6 worth of your hit rolls through on average, which can be pretty impactful.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, especially if you're pairing that with the Kavalos Death Riders, you're getting 31 attacks with a big block that goes in. If you alt attack them and they've got this, then statistically 7/6 of their attacks are going through. So 7/6 times 31, and then they're going to be on, say you did pop the +1 to wound, then they're on 3s to wound at -1 rend 2 damage. It can actually delete a lot of things.
Yeah, and the range is within, not wholly within.
Yes, I might have even put that on the screen. I don't know if I did, but that is an important distinction. Because a lot of times when you buff a friendly unit, it has to be wholly then.
Yeah,
so
you don't see that often anymore, right?
No, almost never. And so you just tag them. You just have to be a toe into the 12-inch bubble, and then there you go. And then send them off to go kill something.
Yeah, that's really nice.
Yeah, let's look at the other two, and then we'll talk about what you're thinking about them.
Yep.
So, Drain Vitality. So, and by the way, the last one, Empowered Naderite Weapons, goes off on a 5. So, the other two are on 7. Harder to get off. Okay, Drain Vitality is you pick an enemy unit within 12 until the start of your next turn, -1 to hit and -1 save. So, this is really powerful, but a lot of times if you're playing a castle build, you don't have anything within 12. 12 is one of the magic numbers for those artifacts and heroic traits I said I liked the best. The 12 is kind of one of your big threat ranges for debuffs and buff abilities. So you're constantly getting used to what 12 looks like for this.
Yeah.
-1 to hit is fantastic, especially against things that have a 4 up to hit or worse. And then -1 to save is just great against everything, unless they're just really low save score. Yeah. So, but you can only be casting that on one unit, and they got to be relatively close by. Let's look at Shard Storm and then wrap everything up with a nice bow here. Shard Storm, not to be confused with Shart Storm, is when you roll a number of dice equal to the number of models in the unit, and 5 up, you're doing immortal damage. So it's just your typical anti-horde spell right now, and these can be really valuable. I love having it in your arsenal, but that you can choose. This is one of those advantages of having a spell lore that everyone knows all the spells for. Then you can pull it out of your arsenal if you need it, but it's not necessarily a go-to. But even against a unit of, say, a reinforced block of 3 elite guys, so they go up to 6, you're doing two mortal damage if you absolutely need to finish a model off or something.
Yeah.
All right, Jonas, what are you thinking about these 3?
It's a solid lore, I think. I mean, you're happy to bring all of those. The last one obviously is a little bit lackluster right now because we're just not in a place in the game where we're bringing a lot of small infantry models, just because cavalry is so good. I mean, for one, that's one reason for it at least. But the Empower Netherite weapons has been a staple in Ossiarch list for such a long time. I don't think you would actually ever leave home without it, right? If you wanted to do an offensive build. And Drain Vitality is such a nice defensive spell that you've got going on. The cool thing is that you see all of these small things separately and they're already quite strong. But if you start adding things on top of one another, like you have the -1 to wound rolls for ranged attacks, and then you've got the +1 save from Catacross, a 5-up ward from the battle traits, and now you get to do -1 to hit and -1 from saves to an enemy unit. So you could really neuter an enemy unit or buff your army so much that you're actually very, very hard to punch through. So yeah, I love that kind of play style for the Ossiarchs. That's what they've always been good at, right?
Yep.
Taking a punch, and then for the tactical minds among us, that's really rewarding with these kind of tools.
For sure. Okay, let's move on to the manifestation lore. It's actually a popular one, but it's not my favorite. I did play it when I went to a teams tournament playing the Nagash list that I'll be showing first today, the Nagash and the horses, and I did take it for that, and it's good. But my playstyle, it's not my favorite.
The assassin guy is, if I remember correctly, is really good, right?
All of them have good attack profiles.
Cool.
So
okay.
This one's cast on a 6, and if I'm not mistaken, they might all be cast on a 6. But and they're all set up holier than 12 outside of 9, standard kind of thing. They all have a 6-up ward. This is the bird, by the way. 10-inch move, 7 health, 5-up save, 6+ ward. It's doing 6 attacks at 4s2, so basically a monster profile with -1 rend and D3 damage. It's not a bad profile at all.
No, not at all.
It's fast. Faster than the average endless spell manifestation, and it subtracts 5 control scores of any enemy infantry units while they're within 6. So it doesn't even have to be in combat to be working on it. So you just park it next to an objective, but not necessarily on it, because it's not helping you with control, and it's still helping you with control.
And stack that with the Crown of Tyranny to reduce it even further by 2, right?
Yep. And then with Catacross's ability, you're really shifting the weight of the math that you're having to do to take an objective, and this can catch people off guard. Even a banner can catch people off guard.
Yeah, that's cool.
So I mean, it's just a good profile, and it's just a good spell.
Does it have a 6-up ward, Ryan? In these
all of them got 6-up.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's move on to the next one. They're all kind of beat sticks with a little bit of tech. So the Nightmare Predator, same 6, cast on a 6, outside of 9, holier than 12. 8-inch move, so normal, they all fly, of course. 7 health, 5-up save, a 6-up ward. 6 attacks, 4s2. Now, he's the same profile mathematically, except he's got +1 point of rend, and the damage isn't swingy. It's just a flat 2. And end of any turn, including in your opponent's, if this manifestation was destroyed or banished this turn, and the unit that summoned it is on the table, which is implicit because if this unit that summoned it isn't on the table, this thing goes away. On a 4-up, set up this manifestation again, wholly within 12 inches of this unit that summoned it, and more than 9 inches from all enemy units. So 50% of the time, even if you kill it, it just comes back for free. Now, considering that what's it called? Endless spells are easier to banish now for each one you have on the table. It could be a liability that he comes back. That wasn't the case when they first released the index.
Yeah.
So you might not want him to be on the table.
Good call.
Maybe it doesn't. But at the same time, I still think it's very strong. And remember, all 3 of these are moving endless spells that we're looking at here, which means you could just set them up, send them to a corner to turn off deep strikes from your opponent's units.
Yeah.
As of today, by the way, I think if I interpreted correctly, the FAQ said that now endless spells that are summoned around endless spells with moving characteristics can be, in fact, set up within 9 inches. So it wouldn't be shutting off, say, Kronspine coming in and eating this thing and healing or whatever, or whatever it's going to happen. But otherwise, it should turn off teleport stuff. Any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, pretty good. The profile reminds me of the Incarnate, but that one obviously has 3 damage, and +1 rent against manifestations. But yeah, that's on an 8+. Obviously, has a better save as well, a little bit more movement, but this is strong. Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, definitely. And let's look at the last one, which is the head, is definitely the best one. Same summoning situation, 7 health, 8-inch move, 5-up save, 6-up ward. He's got a shooting attack, and it's 12 inches, so that means you could summon him and still get to shoot him in the turn you summoned him. 4 attacks, 3s, 4s, -1 D3. And then his melee attack is also the same, but, just in combat. And he can shoot in combat. But the real reason you're taking this thing is because it subtracts 1 from ward rolls for enemy units while they're within 12 inches of this manifestation, period. All you got to do is set the guy up, and now your army that you're playing against with a 6-up ward has no ward. 5-up ward goes to like half effectiveness at 6, and then further down the chart. This can help you really punch through the right people. It's like a way better Purple Sun in the sense of what it's doing, because it doesn't have to get into combat to do what it needs to do. It still gets to be effective from a distance, even with its shooting output. And like I said, it can fly around and go block things off. I think the main reason people are taking this lore to help punch through some tough tanky armies, like getting through trolls with a 6-up ward instead of a 5, makes a huge difference. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, a lot of fun, a lot of variety. They're also quite fast, all of them.
Yeah, 8, 8, and 10. So, can do some stuff. All right. In the interest of time, let's move on to the Warscroll breakdown. So here we go. Now, Jonas, I came up with this list myself based off of my experiences in list writing. Is there anything that's on this list or not on this list that you would have liked to have seen?
I definitely would have included Catacross and the Mortic Crawler, and then I always want to know about the wizard guy with a scythe that you never see.
He's actually really good, but I can talk about that a little bit later.
Okay, yeah, it's just because I love that model. It's very Necron-y from 40k.
Yes.
And I never see it on the table. And back in the day when I started my my short venture into OBR, I actually planned on using him as different heroes because I don't necessarily like the Soul Mace, for example. I find his throne a little bit derpy, and I know a lot of people love him for that, but it feels a little bit weird to me, to be honest.
I got you. I actually like his throne, but I get it.
But I'm excited to hear this breakdown because if I know you well enough, Ryan, you've written a whole bunch because every time that you do breakdowns, there's so much to dive into. So I'm very excited.
Okay, cool. We're doing the heroes first, and then we'll look at some of the
supplementary units. Catacross.
Yeah, so Catacross. All right, Catacross, Mortarch of the Necropolis. If you're not aware, all of Nagash's armies in Death have at least one Mortarch. So here we've got 2. We got Catacross and Archon. In Night Haunt, we've got Lady Olinder. In Soulblight, we've got Manfred and Neferata. And Vordry is not, right? He's not a Mortarch. And then I don't think so. He's just a prince.
Yeah.
And then we've got Usharon in Flesh Eater. So this is one of our 2 big guys. And interestingly, if at time of recording, we still have Regiments of Renown for all of those Mortarchs, if I'm not mistaken, which means they usually cost like 700 plus points.
Yeah.
You can bring a Mortarch plus some units in another Death Army, which is pretty cool. So even if you're not an OBR player, keep an eye on what this guy's doing. Granted, he really needs to be in an OBR unit to mainly do what he wants. He's
Mm-hmm.
500 points. As Jonas already referred to, he's got an 18-inch Holy Then Relentless Discipline bubble, so plus 6 inches instead of the 12 that we usually see, which helps compensate for his 4-inch move a bit. But honestly, I think most of the time you're auto running this guy or just running him with a plus 2-inch move on him
Yeah.
to make sure he's keeping up until you need to use him for something else. Ideally, he just stands in the middle of the battlefield and fights off, sees the center, and whatever else you're going to do. He's got a command ability for 1 command point that goes off in your hero phase, and it gives 3 units that you choose. It could be him, it could not be him, +1 to save until the start of your next hero phase while they're standing wholly within 18 of him. This is interesting because you choose it. They have to be within 18 when you choose it. And then if he moves and they move out of his bubble for some reason, then they're no longer getting it, even though if they redeployed back into the bubble, they'd still have it. But this is your because it's in the hero phase, it's not conflicting with your ability to use all out defense in your one of the phases where that's applicable, which means you could functionally be getting +2 to save, ignoring a point of rend or whatever on your save characteristic. And with him, I mean, he has a 3-up save, so it means, and a number of the units you'd want to put it on have a 3-up save, so it means you're bumping them up to a 2-up, and then you could be ignoring a point of rend with an all-out defense on one of those units too.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, he can't use it in combo because it's in the hero phase with, say, one of your other hero phase abilities. So he's not rallying on the same turn he's doing it. What else would you use? He's not a wizard or priest, so he couldn't use magical intervention. But I think it's mainly just rally. But honestly, I don't think he needs it. He's got 20 wounds and a 3-up save going to a 2-up with a 6-up, very easily a 5-up ward in the combat phase at least. He also has a once per turn negate command ability. So if an opponent uses a command, I think within 18 inches, on a 5-up, you roll a d6 on a 5-up. That command counts as having been used, and the command point, goes away, but they don't get to use the actual effect. And then he's got a +3 control score, wholly within 18-inch bubble to all of your troops. So not himself though. So he's got a control score of 5, and he's bumping all of your other guys up to by +3. So if you happen to run MSU on things, you're getting the most bang for your buck. And because it's within his 18-inch holy within bubble, like his relentless discipline bubble, you're trying to stay within that anyway. Also for his +1 to save. So 18 inches is the magic number for Kavalos. I've already kind of basically talked through all the why pick this units, but all points here. But let's go through them one by one. He can take the whole army, so he can take any unit he likes in his regiment. He's super tanky, like I already mentioned. He's even more so with Immortus Guard standing next to him, bumping his possibly 5-up saved 5-up ward to a 4-up. And if that guy with the scythe that you were talking about, the Soul Reaper, is standing next to him, and they're in combat with both of them, they're getting -1 to wound. So imagine you also stack Drain Vitality, -1 to hit, and -1 to save, and -1 to wound, and a 5-up ward going to a 4-up ward. He's almost impossible to kill at that point.
Yeah.
And he also negates the Relentless Discipline's biggest drawback, which is that it's a small bubble. So he's going to be your nexus for giving out your Relentless Discipline points. But like I said, he is slow. A 4 to possibly 6-inch move with the +2-inch move. Yeah, like we'll talk about his output in a second, but thus far, what do you think about Kavalos?
Yeah, I just love these big centerpieces where when they sit at a point in the army where when you take him, you're not handicapping yourself, but when you take him, you're also not overpowering yourself. Like you're not obliged to take a named character, but once you do, just because you love the model or you love the lore, it's not like you're being punished for it. And I feel like Kavalos sits right in the middle of that.
Yeah, for me, the problem is he's not a wizard, and I really wish they had made one of those guys that's at his side a wizard, like a 1-cast wizard. It used to be that when he bracketed, he would lose guys, and he would only fight at the end, and that's just gone now.
Yeah.
But it'd be kind of cool if you at least got some way to kind of interact with the very important spells that you have in the game right now.
That's fair.
But so I feel like he's got a wizard tax that's built into him that you need to take at least a 110-point model, which would be the AoS effector, to get at least 1 cast in the list to get some of those great buff or debuff spells off. But anyway, he is very valuable, I think.
Yeah, that's more of a list building problem than a Catacross problem, though, I feel.
Yeah, it's just he's a lot of points
Yeah,
too.
yeah, definitely true.
Let's take a look at his output and see if we think that also helps pay the price. So anyone that has not seen one of my things before here, we're looking at the type of save you're going into. So 6, 5, 4, 3, or 2. And then off to the right is the expected value average, which is just taking a flat average of those 5 different values and then projecting on it here, which often comes out to be the same as a 4-up save, but can differ a little bit depending on how good the rend is. And he's got 3 different profiles, 2 of which have the crit 2 hits on them. But none of them are companions, by the way. So they're all benefiting from other abilities. So I've got him built out here. On the left is just what he is on his war scroll. So if you look at expected value average, we're looking at about just under 12 damage against all saves averaged out. If he has the anti-charge ability, which I don't think you're going to choose, this would be, oh no, you might choose. So for the extra rend, if he gets charged, then that bumps it up to like 13 or so. If you're using +1 to hit, there's a couple different functional sources of +1 hit. It could be all at attack, but it could also be that you applied the crit 2 hits. Although I
Yeah.
think when I did this, so like you do it through the crits on 5s, which you probably wouldn't put on him. Then it's going up just a little bit more, and if you get all the things off, you go all the way up to 16 on average. He's good, but I don't know if he's 500 points worth of good in terms of
Yeah.
output.
Yeah, this disappoints me a little bit, to be honest.
Yeah, like you have to get a lot of buffs off on him. We're looking at around a 12, and I can tell you right now, the Ogroid Therodon, who just went down 20, or not Therodon, but Myrmidon in Slaves of Darkness, who went down 20 points to 150, does about the same amount of output as this guy does on his
Yeah.
base profile.
Yeah, it's really disappointing.
So yeah, but that's not why you're using him. And to be fair, he's not getting to fight until they get to you. And if they've gotten to you, they're not going to take him down anytime soon. So unless they're just debuffing the crap out of him for some reason. But yeah, so personally, I think his output could be buffed, or he could, lose some, get a points discount or something, or have a wizard keyword put on there, wizard 1 or something for one of the guys. Something would be cool. Even if he bracketed and you lost the wizard, I'd be cool with that. But his profile does get bracketed, which kind of sucks because it's not amazing for 500 points. But anyway, I think Belthanos hits harder than this, and he's a good bit cheaper, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And also buffs your army in a very important way.
Yeah, and it's super fast.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to the next guy, which would be the other Mortarch. So that's Archon the Black, the Mortarch of Sacrament, for 90 points cheaper, which to me is a huge difference.
Yeah.
He's a three level wizard with a +1 to cast. He has a spell ignore for all OBR models wholly within 18 on a 4-up, which is amazing.
Yeah.
He's basically the old Null Myriad.
Yeah, once I saw that Warscroll, I was like, oh, they didn't lose Null Myriad. They just placed it on Archon.
Yeah. He's got impact hits that are twice as good against heroes. So you roll a D3 and then you double it against heroes. So he could do 6 mortal damage quite easily against a hero on the charge, which could kill almost every foot hero and would make a serious impact on some bigger guys. And his Warscroll spell, Curse of Years, used to be way better. It's good to know that. So you roll 10 dice, and the first round is every 6 does immortal damage. And then for however many successes you had, that you get to roll that many d6 for your second round, which goes to a 5-up, and you keep going. And it used to be that it could go on indefinitely, which used to average out to about 4 mortal damage. But it's now once you get to 2s, if you ever get there, I don't know if I've ever gotten there, I'll be honest, in the games I've played with him thus far. But if you did get to the 2s, it does stop because it doesn't say to keep going. Yeah. And so that averages out to around 3 mortal damage. It could spike and get a lot, but you're probably not. But the real reason you're taking him, again, is he takes the whole army. He's a 3-level wizard with a +1 to cast built in. So he's knocking out the wizard requirement by himself. I said he's decently durable, 14 health, 3-up save, 6-up ward going to 5-up in the combat phase. He's fast. He's a fast locust for keeping up with the Death Riders because unlike Catacross, even though he's only got a 12-inch Relentless Discipline bubble, he's faster than the I think he's 14-inch move. No, he's 12-inch move, 14 with the +2. So he's 2 inches faster than them. And his spell ignore can be game-changing. There are some armies that are just going to get turned off by having the risk of him not only unbinding them, he's got 3 unbinds, but also having a second filter step for those spells. Let's take a look at his output, and then we'll see what you think about Archon. So here's his output. Remember, the scaling for Catacross is much higher. So if he's just on his base, he's only doing about 6.5 damage against average saves. With his impact hits thrown in against a non-hero or monster. Oh, by the way, that was for hero or monster, not just heroes. He's doing 8, and then if it is on a hero or monster and gets those impact hits, it goes up to just shy of 10, so like 9.5. So what are your thoughts on Archon?
Yeah, it looks amazing. Mostly because realistically, you're probably only bringing 2 heroes, maybe 3 if you're bringing the Leech Kavalos. So you need a hero that can be at different places because of its speed to have that relentless discipline bubble at the spots that you want it to be. You also need a wizard and an unbinding platform because there's endless spells abound. And then he also brings a spell ignore. He just does everything that you want an Ossiarch Bonereapers hero to do. It's really, really good.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't think you need an 18-inch bubble for this guy. And the best defense is a good offense,
Yeah.
right? So, like, even though Catacross is giving you +1 to save, if you just wipe out a unit because you're alpha E enough to send that big block of Death Riders in, and this guy's making sure they don't die. And remember, he could also put the crits on 5s on them. He's fast enough to get within 12 and doesn't mind being within 12 of things to be giving Drain Vitality for -1 to hit and -1 save. And he's just an endless spell generating platform with a +1 to cast means even for a cover or magical intervention, he's doing it on base casting level instead of -1. I'm a huge fan of Archon, and I think that he's almost an auto take in the current meta with what you're taking. As soon as the Death Riders go up in price and can't get it, you can't take as many of them. Maybe we start leaning into a more castly, slow moving build. But if you're going fast, I really think Archon ticks off too many boxes to not consider. And I think 410 is a reasonable price for him. So, yeah.
Yeah, it looks really good.
So last hero is I debated on this one and we don't have an output for this guy because he's not worth talking about. But I debated the Soul Mason or the Leech Kavalos, and I'll tell you why I didn't go with the Leech Kavalos is because even though I'm using him more often than the Soul Mason, is because I think the Soul Mason complements what you need if you're going for a Catacross build more than the Leech Kavalos is necessary in general. This guy is a 2-caster for 160 points with a +1 to cast Immortus and Council, which I think is probably what you're doing if you're not doing Kavalos Lance or Mortec Ballistari. His Warscroll spell gives strike first to a unit wholly than 12 of him. So you could do that in your hero phase and send him out. And you could, of course, also do that in your as magical intervention. He can only, one of his downsides, he can only take infantry plus 0 to 1 Gothazar Harvesters, which is not a great unit right now. And that means he's not taking Death Riders. So you're going to need someone else in that list to be able to take them. And that would be, we'll talk about it later, but one of the lieges, I think Vok Morshin, who's the named Mortisan, and then the 3 big War Master types, so Nagash, Catacross, and Archon. Why take him? He's the cheapest way to get 2 casts in the army, and I think if you need only 1 wizard to be doing that, this is the one you go for. He's extra necessary in a Catacross list. He can be your enhancement caddy, because if you're just taking like named guys like Vok Morshin, who's 10 points more and also a 2-caster, then you're not getting an enhancement if you're trying to keep it a 2-drop list. Are not taking Leech Kavalos. He's fast and doesn't. I said fast. Doesn't mind being in combat. I don't think that was a copy. That was a copy paste from someone else. So he is not fast and does mind being in combat. So ignore that. That was a problem. And he does have a strike first spell, which is always handy. So anyway, apart from that second to last point there, that's why you take this guy. Jonas, what are you thinking?
Yeah, apart from his silly chair, it looks very good. Again, he's always been very popular, right? And 160 for a 2-cast wizard is already quite fair. And then you got all the other stuff that he brings. The only thing that's a little bit limiting is the fact that he can only bring infantry and a harvester, I suppose. Because I can't imagine you want a list without Kavalos Death Riders, but that's why you have Archon or Catacross or the Leech Kavalos, I guess.
Yeah, so I mean, in a 2-drop list with Katakros, you'd be putting all the Death Rider units into Katakros's thing, and you still have one spot left over. And then
Yeah.
in this guy's regiment, like you're putting either Mortek Guard or Immortus Guard or
Hmm.
even Morghast count as infantry. So it's a good chunk of the army that he can
Okay, yeah,
take.
that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah, but just not the Kavalos stuff, and not a catapult.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to our first unit then. Speaking of Death Riders. So 5 for 180 points. This is unquestionably going to go up, although we just saw the new battle scroll today and they didn't change any points except for the slaves. So this means we're going to have to wait till the next big update. But I don't see a world where they don't go to at least 200. I just don't see it. They're being spammed too much right now to not. They have 10-inch move, but it goes to 12 with the extra movements from the relentless discipline, and also potential retreat and charge, as discussed. 3 health each, so a big block of 10's got 30 health on a 4-up save, 6 up ward going to 5 in the combat phase if you've got a hero around. They can charge through infantry, and if they do so, they do impact hits. Fun to know, are important to know is that if you need a 3+, you need a 3-inch charge, and you just barely get in, they won't have crossed over the models, and therefore don't get their impact hits. And the impact hits are just rolling a single D3 and doing that many mortal damage on a D3 2+. So it's not really anything to write home about. The riders have 3 attacks on 3s and 4s. So, like I said, elf profile with a built-in -1 rend and 1 damage, but it goes to 2 on the charge, and they have crit 2 hits. The horses themselves aren't really worth talking about. So why do you take the unit? It's easily the most efficient unit in the army in terms of defensiveness, output per point, just their speed, everything you need. They
Yeah.
take your buffs really well, especially on a block of 10. Pre-game move with Kavalos Lance is fantastic, and they're good in 5s as well for objectives and tactics. And they're 15 health on a 4-up save, 6-up, or 5-up ward is still not going to die super easily. So you could even break them up. So let's take a look at their output and then see what you're thinking about them. So I did 2 charts here. This is going to be them with what we're basically going to do is look at them on their base profile, their charge, and then including the impact hits if they're against infantry. But then we're going to zoom in on the situation, assuming they get a charge off, and then look at more specific buffs you could give them since they're such a good caddy. I scaled these 2 charts on the basis of where they're going to be in the next chart. So that's why this only reaches the halfway point. So their base is they're doing a block of 5. Again, we run these in 10s often, but a block of 5 is doing just shy of 6 damage. If they're on the charge, though, that jumps up to about 10. And then if they're charging and getting to do impact hits, we're looking at about almost 12. But let's go to the next chart. And again, this is just a block of 5. So now this is assuming charge, and then the charge base, as in we're not adding any new buffs in. So like we said, that's around 10. If you add the +1 to wound from relentless discipline instead of the 5-up ward, then that jumps up to what's that, 12.5 or so, or 13. Then if you have crit 5s, you'll actually see it's a little worse than the +1 to wound, because it's functionally adding, another +1 to hit ish. But if you get both of those, then we're jumping up to around, what is that, 4 to 15. And if you get both of those plus all at attack, then a unit of 5 is crossing over average versus all saves over 18 damage.
Wow.
How does this compare against Dawn Riders?
Riders? It might be very alike, actually. I don't remember the exact number anymore because I always calculated them in pairs of, well, in groups of 10 as well. But I think with all of the buffs on them, 10 Dawn Riders did like, I don't know, 32 wounds or something like that to a 4-up save. So, gotcha. Yeah, that's almost exactly the same.
Yeah. And they're cheaper. So it might be that they're actually more efficient. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
you don't have the built-in -1 to hit, I suppose, but
no, and we've got a 4-up save instead of a 3, but you don't have a 6-up ward that goes to a 5.
Yeah, and it's the -1 hits also obviously not built in, but still.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, there's I mean, the thing is, all those buffs that I just named are almost like guaranteed to go off if you want them.
Yeah, we haven't even considered priority target from the GHB 24-25.
Yeah, I don't really think about priority target all that much. Plus, I've got both all at attack and +1 to wound in here anyway.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's that's another way you could get those. But considering it's often not going into the target you want,
Yeah,
I'd
that's
be
true.
more inclined to say that you get +1 rend on something.
Hmm.
But anyway, so I mean, the unit's just really good and really efficient. On paper, they don't look amazing, maybe, but once you start seeing them in mass, they start to get really hard to deal with. And there are ways to bring models back. Nagash and his list can bring back the whole unit of 10 of them, which, you're getting 360 points for free with all those buffs. It can get pretty obnoxious. So, yeah, but there's a reason that they're probably going to get nerfed.
Yeah.
Okay, we got two more units to look at before we get into some of the other details. So the Tyrannic
Super
cohort might be.
surprised by this one, Ryan. Gotta
I
say.
was about to say it. By the way, for the people that have been on Instagram in the way I have, or whatever else you might see this, those little beasts that are running around have a very Moo Dang esque kind of vibe going on. If anyone's a Moo Dang fan out there, so yeah, I think of them as my little skeletal Moo Dangs. But anyway, this is a Warcry warband of 8 models. It's like 3 actual like not beasts and then 5 beasts, but they don't have the beast keyword or anything. What's surprising about this unit is that they have 2 health each, so you're actually looking at 16 health for a
Okay.
eight
Wow.
person unit on a 4-up save, 6-up ward going to 5. But they're also deep strikers outside of 9, which can't be reinforced. Their melee is not bad, and then the beast melee is the second one that I mentioned there. The real reason you take them is for the deep strike adds immense value for OBR, especially if you're castling up and you don't have a chance to get over there. And even though they can't do a take the flanks on the turn that they come in, if you have 2 of these, which is totally a viable option, you just put them in the corners, get them ready, and you've also got to take their land either that turn or a different turn. And then the next turn you can easily do take the
Oh,
flanks if
you
they're
can
not
take
ready.
2 of these?
You can take 2, you just can't reinforce them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So they're like they're a Warcry unit, not a what's it
they're not
called?
unique. Oh, they're not.
Oh,
We don't
okay. I
have
thought they
any of
were an
those unique
Underworlds
units.
unit.
No, they're Warcry.
Oh, wow.
Their wounds absorption easily goes underestimated. I had a unit of 3 Varangard at a tournament that took 2.5 turns to bring this unit down, which was shocking. He didn't want to use the strike twice, or, to fight 2 times in 1 turn, because he thought he wouldn't need it, and then he just got stuck in combat with these guys. They're actually our best. They're most efficient per point health absorption, which is kind of
Mm.
even if they're outside of the wounds, the 5-up ward bubble, and then
Yeah,
they move
7-inch
7 inches.
move. Wow.
So if they happen to be within that bubble, they're going up to 9.
Yeah.
And I think there's also some tactical value to having them in a Catacross list, because they go take their flanks, they run back to the center to be your screens, and then they're protected in that big 18-inch bubble relatively soon after coming back. And they're fast enough to get there. They're almost double the speed of Mortek Guard.
Yeah.
In the next image, I showed their output against Mortek Guard. So the Tyrannic cohort base. So we're going to look for the first 2 are going to be the base profiles of Tyrannic cohort and then Mortek Guard, and then the anti-charge. I only gave them that ability because I don't think you're putting any of the other buffs on them.
Yeah.
But the Tyrannic cohort is worse than Mortek Guard in terms of output. Even if you don't control for points, it would be even worse if you did. But it's not significantly different
Yeah, not by a
different
lot.
until you get the anti-charge. And honestly, they're probably over somewhere in a corner, not getting the buffs of a hero anyway. They're way faster than Mortek Guard, and they've got way more tactical flexibility. And they have, excluding the unrendable part, they are more defensive than Mortek Guard are per point.
Yeah.
So I think there's easily I think they're almost an auto taking this unit, and then maybe even 2. There have been tournament lists that have taken 2 for sure. So I like this unit a
Surprising.
lot.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Did not see this
Okay.
coming at all. I mean, I
Yeah.
checked the
They're
PowerPoint obviously, so I knew it was coming, but before I did, it was interesting.
they've got a lot of strategic utility. They're no river blades with teleporting, but
I
they
mean,
are
they're as
there.
close as you can get, I think, with a OBR unit.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, for sure. All right, let's look at our last unit, which is my favorite, the Mortek Crawler. 260 points, 5-inch move, which is amazing for an artillery piece, essentially. 24-inch range, so it means his control or his threat range is 29, or if you add plus 2-inch move, we're looking at 31. Control 5, it's on the big ironclad base, the long one. So it kind of counts like a monster. 12 health on a 4+ save, 6 upward going to 5 up if you got a hero round. We'll get to the next ability in a second, but basically it's way tankier than you would assume. It's not easy to bring this thing down. And it could even manage, even if you bring it into combat, it could retreat on a given turn to set it up for being able to shoot next turn. And then taking 2 to 3 mortal damage isn't going to really be that big of a problem on this thing because it's got the ward and it's also just really tanky. But it's let's actually look at its ranged attack first. So it's got 4 attacks on 4s, 2s, 1 going to 2 rend if it's into infantry, and it does D3 plus 2 damage with crit 2 hits, which functionally makes it feel like it's mathematically on 3s and 2s, but on a spikier level. And if you're in the Mortek Ballistari, it's getting +1 to hit, which makes it feels like it's on 2s and 2s mathematically. I think we'll look at the averaged output in a second, but that damage characteristic is equivalent to, I think, like a frigate. It's a bit cheaper. Obviously, doesn't have as much in-game utility, but it does give you the strike last ability. So basically, what happens is in a turn when you've shot, which includes covering fire, by the way, if it targeted an enemy unit with all 4 of its shots, then you can, for each one of these catapults, and it's not like once per turn. So if you take multiple, it stacks. It on a 4+ gives that target strike last for that turn. If it got targeted by 2 of these units, like that ability was used by another catapult earlier in the turn, then it gets +1 on that, and I believe it also gets +1 if an AoS effector is standing within 12. I don't know if that can go up to 2+ because I don't usually do that combo, but it's either that it stops at 3+ or it can get all the way up to 2+, which is pretty amazing. And you get to try it multiple times. So if you shoot the same unit twice, you get two attempts at trying to make it strike last, which can be really clutch for focusing down one unit. Say that you've got -1 to save on them from Drained Vitality, which also applies to shooting attacks. Mm-hmm. And then you're doing all this stuff and you're giving it strike last for like your melee hammer to go in and remove them. It's pretty strong. Also, the crit 2 hits makes the covering fire not so bad because it goes from a 4+ to hit to a 5+, but the half of the things that are going through for you, so your 6s are doubling back. And so if you do get stuff through, it can be pretty brutal. I've lifted 20+ wounds with a covering fire that I got really lucky on with this thing. It's just deleting things. So why pick this unit? I said it's probably the best War Machine output in the game. I put a question mark there, but I think it's pretty obvious. The Mortek Ballistari gives your +1 to hit in your turn, so long as it doesn't move and it stays in your territory. Strike last can be game-changing, especially in your opponent's turn with a covering fire. And it doesn't have to even have done damage. It just have to have targeted the unit.
That's really nice.
And then the AoS effector is a good combo. He can take any amount of these, I think. He can take 0 to 1 of them. That's what it is, which means he's the only Mortison that can take one of these, and he can make it even more likely that it goes off. Let's look at the output, and then Mortek. Jonas, tell me what you're thinking. So if it's just on its base profile without getting any +1 to hit, one of these boys is doing just under 6 damage against all saves. Against infantry, it jumps up to 7 with a +1 to hit, which is real easy to get. It's doing but not against infantry, then it just goes up a tad bit. But if you are against infantry and you get the +1 to hit, then you're going up to, on average, about 9 damage. But you're probably taking 2 of these, so you're talking about 18 damage, and it has a lot of spike potential. This is just an average. If they have you'll see if you've got a 5+ save on infantry, then we're getting up to about 11 damage per catapult, which can really also be a horde remover. Which is also fantastic because you might not want to have to just chew out your screens with your Kavalos Death Riders. You might want to focus this down first and then go have them get something juicier. So what are you thinking for 260 points?
I find it really hard to say, Ryan, to be honest. When once we did our preview a couple of months ago, or how long has it been? I don't know. And you were so psyched about these guys. Like, I can almost see it, but not completely. And now that we know the full index, I can see it even more, I suppose. But I can also see it whiffing completely, as happens with War Machines. And it always has had that weakness, right? If you whiffed, I'm happy to know that you can increase its likeliness of hitting now, and that you don't actually need it to hit to have the strike loss effect. That's
Yeah.
very strong. Would you say it's interesting to at least bring one, or do you think
Yes.
that like if you invest into one, you should probably bring two?
Well, that depends on the formation, but honestly, a lot of tournament lists are winning with at least one or two of these in the list.
Yeah.
It's not like a niche thing. It's just a Ryan thing. It's actually quite popular with tournament lists too. So yeah, I not every build is going to want one, but I think if you're debating where to put 260 points, it's not the worst option. I mean, I have an actual list where I was debating what to do with 260 points, and I thought,
Okay.
do I do this or do I do one block of Mortek Guard and one Tyrannic cohort? And there's an argument for taking this instead, depending on how much you need that strike last and how much like random specific anti-infantry
Yeah.
damage you need to do.
I mean,
So
if not for all the other stuff, just because it's a sick model, right? It's definitely the best looking war machine out there.
oh yeah,
And
it's
it's
amazing.
so cool. I just keep being stunned by how many different methods these guys must have tried out to paint bone in a different color.
Right.
Like almost all of the models are just like 80% bone, and they managed to make it look like have a variety in color still. It's so cool. Really, really
Yeah.
nice, lovely model, and good
Yeah.
rules. Yeah.
If you look at how they what kind of upgrade it got from the Tomb King's Screaming Skull
Oh
catapult,
yeah.
it's a night and day difference.
Yeah.
This thing's just amazing. I
Yeah.
I actually have four of them, but the fourth one was in a kit that I like a discount box or whatever, and I haven't built it, so I'm trying to get rid of that one. But anyway, it's a great model. All right, let's move on to the way we build our battle profiles.
Yeah.
So here we go. This is still relevant at this point. In the top, you see our heroes, and in the bottom, you see our non-hero units, which we will refer to as units, at least for this discussion. Basically, you're looking at largely infantry, except for the Death Riders are cavalry, the Harvester is a monster, and the Mortek Crawler is a war machine. And in terms of the other stuff, I'm going to break it down in just a second, but you'll see that we don't have that many different units. It's mostly Mortison guys, and then like your big leader dudes. So let's go to the next slide to talk about how I usually break these down. So an unlimited unit is a unit that literally any hero can take. So that would be all of your infantry units, which would be Tyrannic Cohort, Mortek Guard, Necropolis Stalkers, Immortus Guard, and the two Morghast units, so Harbingers and Archai. All of them can be taken by any hero you like. Doesn't matter. And at least 0 to 1 or more Gothazar Harvesters can be taken by every single hero. If they can take any, then they can take as many as they want. But Gothazar Harvester might be one of the weakest units in the book. The italics heroes, the ones that are literally written in italics, the ones that can be taken inside another hero's regiment, are the Liege Kavalos, and can be taken by all the War Masters, the actual War Masters. So Nagash, Catacross, and Archon, which is nice if you need like what enhancement caddy, like I'm saying, but you want to go like all Mortarks for some reason, like Catacross and Archon. And there is an argument if you're debating between Nagash or Catacross and Archon. I'm going to do that in one of my summary videos. What the pluses and minuses are of going with either one of those builds, because they're almost the same price. The Catacross and Archon together are like 30 points more expensive. But and then you could take a Liege Kavalos in that regiment or whatever, and still have an artifact caddy or have someone that can, keep up with some Death Riders, whatever. Your War Master types, for lack of a better term, are the actual War Masters, so the three I just mentioned, plus Kavalos heroes, the Liege Kavalos and the named version, which is Arch Kavalos Santos, and then Vok Morshan. A War Master type in my wording here is a hero that can take any OBR. And they all can take plus 0 to 1 of the Liege Kavalos, the italics hero, except for, of course, the Liege Kavalos himself.
Yeah.
So these are really important units if you're trying to take some cavalry or like take the crawlers. Your restricted units that have like 0 to 1 next to them are your Gothazar Harvesters, which can only be taken 0 to 1 for all the Mortisans except Vok Morshan, who can take any combination he wants. And Mortek Crawlers can only be taken 0 to 1 by the Mortisan Ossiffector, otherwise have to be taken by one of the War Master types. And then the guys that have the any infantry leader profile are the Mortisans, but all Mortisans but Vokmortian, who again can take anything. So it's relatively flexible, but sometimes you run into kind of some points where you're like, man, as we see in a lot of armies, I really wish I could take one of those Mortisans as a Italics hero. That would really add so much value to my list building potential. But that's a problem that everyone has, and I'm not going to complain about OBR's situation because they can get around a good bit of it in a decent enough way with their really strong War Masters. Even Nagash is really strong, as we'll see in one of the lists I'll talk about.
Yeah.
Any thoughts about this?
I'm happy to see that their Italics hero is called a sub-commander, and I just wonder now why not all of them are called sub-commanders.
Yeah, that's a great name. Yeah,
it's such a technical term that I would never have guessed that they would use for a fancy army, because for Lumina, for example, it's Paragon. It doesn't necessarily mean anything that would connect you to an Italics hero kind of thing. But Sub-Commander is so clear, and I just wish War Masters were what they are in your example here, and Sub-Commanders were what we would call Italics heroes. Just to have a clear term to talk about that. But
yeah, exactly. Agreed. All right, let's go to the lists, I guess. So the first one is the kind of meta list. I said it was written by the meta. I called it Sleepy Cavallo because Nagash is kind of a death's head kind of thing, and a bunch of dead horse riders. But anyway, I put Nagash's war scroll here on the screen so that we can see him, because I didn't talk about him earlier. He's worth talking about, but obviously he's not OBR exclusive, although I do think Nagash is the strongest in OBR.
As he usually is.
The list is super simple. It's just Nagash plus 30 Death Riders. I chose to split my one block of 10 into 2 5s, which could put you up to 1960 points, 108 health. But Nagash, one of his abilities to bring a whole block of 10 back if you want, so you could add 30 health back onto that. It's a 1-drop list and has max control of 40. But let's talk about, and then the lore, of course, is what it is. Battle formation was Kavalos Lance for the pregame move, obviously. And then the manifestation lore was Morbid Conjuration. I actually didn't take Morbid Conjuration to my tournament because one of our team members, you can't double up the manifestation lores, and someone else was using it. And I think it would have been better if I had taken it because it's got one extra spell than the OBR spell lore, which was also good. But sometimes with the Nagash's 9 cast, you're really wishing you had more things to cast it on. So let's quickly talk about Nagash. 18 save, or 18 health, 3-up save, 10-inch moves, 5-up ward. He gets bracketed, but his bracketing only subtracts 3 from his power level, so he goes down from 9 to 6. Boo-hoo. He adds 2 to his casting rolls as long as he hasn't miscast on that turn. But if he does miscast, even though he takes the damage, he doesn't have to stop casting spells. He just loses the +2 and takes the damage. So he goes down to a normal casting bonus. His Rampage is fantastic, but honestly, it doesn't come up enough. It's Hand of Dust, and I know we've talked about it on the channel plenty of times. I don't want to get into it, but basically you can auto kill a hero or monster, but now at the end of the turn. But it just doesn't come up as often as you'd think it would, because Nagash is not that hard to kill, and there is some argument to be made that you swap out some of the Death Riders for a block of Immortus Guard so that you can bump his ward up to 4+ instead, just to keep him alive, and then maybe I'd be more inclined to throw him into combat. But then, of course, the Immortus Guard can't keep as well up with him, because one advantage in this list is that every single one of your models moves 10 inches, so they're all moving 12 when you add +2. A downside is Nagash is the only locus for your ability, which means if they do kill him, you run out of all your stuff. But anyway, he's got the ability where you're bringing back in one of your phases a full unit that died, which is priceless. And if you only play this version of the army and then go to anything without Nagash, you're like, what happened to my 10 guys that I get? It becomes such a part of your strategy for the game that you're getting that back unless Nagash dies early. And then his spell, which some people call his unlimited spell, but not to be confused with an actual unlimited spell that can be cast unlimited times up to the number of wizards you have, 1 per wizard. His spell can be cast unlimited times on him with his 9 casts, but they all have to target different units. It has 3 different things it can do. If it targets an enemy unit, it does D3 mortal damage. If it targets a friendly death unit, so even if you took a Regiment of Renown, it would still apply to them. He can either return a number of slain models to the unit with a combined health characteristic of 3, which is great because that's how much each one of your Death Riders is. But I'll be honest, more often than not, you are giving a 5-up ward to them, which protects them in the shooting phase and against mortal damage from non-combat sources.
Yeah.
In addition, and it means that they can go be independent agents, keeping away from Nagash if they need to go out and just do something. Then my main gripe with this spell is that it's wholly within 18, even when it ties or even when it applies to an opponent's unit. And a lot of times your opponent's units are not wholly within 18 in the gash. So you might be thinking, well, I'm going to cast this on my 4 different Death Riders, so they're each going to get a 5-up ward. That's 4 spells. And then I'm going to try to cast the crit hits, Empower Naderite Weapons. That goes up to 5 of his 9. And then you're like, well, maybe with my other 4, I do my endless spells. But what if you got your endless spells already on table? Then you're like, well, I guess I'll hit 4 enemy units with this. But a lot of times there are not that many enemy units that are wholly within 18 unless you play super aggressive with Nagash.
Yeah.
And so if it just said within for the enemy units,
that would be big change.
And, yeah, that would be a huge quality of life thing, improvement. In my experience playing with this list, it was really fun. It's strong. A lot of people send in at least one of those blocks of Death Riders to just tie up the opponent so that they can't progress up the board, and they're just stuck in a tar pit, and you're using the other ones to go do other stuff. Nagash can do some work, but my problem at the tournament, at least that I went to, I got paired poorly. I feel not like my team paired me poorly, but I got into some bad matchups for me. And in addition, that was back when priority targets still worked against your whole regiment. And so it was just destroying all the shooting armies were just destroying every single one of my units. Whereas otherwise, I just would have chosen no unit to be a priority target, and then or honor guard, and then Nagash would have been the only target.
Yeah.
So I think that would have made a huge difference.
Definitely.
But it's a fun list. It's just owning 30 Death Riders is probably a bad idea, considering they're about to go up in price almost definitely in the next 2-3 months. So I think 20 is a nice sweet spot to own, and then try to flesh out your army with other stuff.
Yeah.
Jonas, I've been talking at length here. What are you thinking?
I love these kind of lists. I love when Nagash is viable. I am excited to play him in a vampires list, although I guess the juiciest target for his resurrection ability is 10 Blood Knights, which you would usually not be able to return, but Nagash can, because it can be any non-unique death unit that's not hero. As for the OBR side of it, it's just, I love these kind of lists where it's so simple to understand what's going on, but once you get to play it, there's so many layers that you have to think about, and I can imagine that it took quite a lot of practice for you to understand how little options that you have once you only have these 5 things running around the board, right?
I actually, I'd been complaining about 4th edition being hard for me to find my, let's say, voice, at the risk of sounding cheesy, in my play style. Until I played this list. My team said,
cool.
My opponents, or my team said, Ryan, I had tried Tzeentch, I tried Ideneth, and even running a meta Tzeentch list wasn't working for me. And then I just tried this one on because it was like, whatever. Like when I went to the tournament, I only owned 5, or at least I'd only built 5 of the 30 Death Riders, and I was literally making an amalgam force of other people's models. It was like 5 different sources of models because I was just borrowing them from everyone. But it was an immediate click. The only reason I think it did so poorly at the tournament, I only went 1-4 because it's again a pairing situation, was that a good chunk of my pairings were just not in my favor. I had to go in against the mirror match, but with the Catacross really defensive list, which just destroyed me. And it was one of the guys that was at World's Champions just this past week in Atlanta, French player, really good guy. And just I had to go against 30 Dawn Riders. Like that's not easy. I just had some really rough matchups that were kind of like, I think if I'd gotten some different situations, I probably would have. It's a pretty self-playing list, at least with my way of thinking of how to play the game. So I don't mean to contradict what you just said, but for me, at least, it felt very comfortable until I got into the matchups that I got. But up until then in my practice games, I was like, 3-1, I think. So it was pretty good.
Okay, cool. Love to hear it.
All right, let's take a look at a list 2 of 3. I did 3 lists here because I wanted to have a little more variety. So this is my actual list I had been running recently. If you notice from the title, it might sound a little Skaven-y, because it is. It was originally inspired by me wanting to copy my favorite Skaven list, which is 4 Warp Lightning Cannons. I brought 3 Mortek Crawlers originally, but then I pulled it back to only 2 because that's probably smarter. But it's basically the Archon situation I was talking about. So we're in Mortek Balistrari with obviously the OBR spell lore, and Forbidden Power, which might not be as obvious. Archon is my War Master General with 2 Death Riders units and 2 Crawlers in his regiment. And the second regiment only has 1 model on the table because you put the Tyrannic cohort in Deep Strike. And Liege Kavalos is my caddy for minus the 2 12-inch buffs. So the minus control score and the minus 2 to charge. It's a full 2,000 points, but it won't be legal once the Death Riders go up, of course, unless something else balances it out. 121 health, 2 drops, 45 control score max. Archon is my spell centerpiece, but he's also the locus for my abilities. I actually went at one of our the threshold tournament, invitational tournaments here in the Netherlands. I actually got 5th place out of 20, I think. Recently playing this list. I got 3-1-1. I had a 1 draw against Gitz that I think could have been pushed easily over into 4-1 territory and would have put me in 4th place, but it just didn't play out that way with the way the clock was going. But anyway, it's a strong list. You basically castle up with Forbidden Power. So you're using the bridge, the Soul Scream bridge, to prevent people from getting battle tactics, to allow you to teleport, to screen out. It's got 12 health on a 4-up save. 6-up ward. I even used it to teleport the crawler, as I recorded on a battle report recently, onto an objective, which doesn't count as moving, so they still get the buff from the formation. The Death Riders in 2 big blocks are like self-explanatory. Both the Liege Kavalos and Archon can keep up with them, and if one dies, you've got some redundancy for still giving out the abilities. And the Tyrannic cohort is doing what Tyrannic cohort does. So it looks like it doesn't have a lot of tools, but Forbidden Power, also has Shards of Valigar, which also can screen out the deep strikes and stuff. And against a Skaven player, if you put it around a gnaw hole, you basically destroy the gnaw hole without having to fight it and go over there, because they can't summon anything within range of it. And then you're also using it as screens, and then you can use the Horrorghast and the Lock-On. Even though I don't have a wizard that could actually use Lock-On, you can use both of those as to just screen out people's deep strikes or teleport. It has so much flexibility and so much output, you would never expect it. It doesn't look like it's got a lot going on, but it really does. What are you thinking?
I love this list. It looks so much fun. You've got a little bit of everything, and it's not too many models to transport either. So, yeah, big fan.
Yeah, we'll have to play a game sometime soon. I'll bring this list maybe.
Yeah, it looks so much fun. This is a kind of list that I would have loved to play when I was, very shortly collecting OBR. Looks so much fun.
Yeah, it is fun. I think it's got some legs. I don't know if it's a 5-0 list, but I think it's easily a 4-1 in the right hands, and could in the right matchup it could be 5-0.
Yeah, the main thing that kept me from collecting OBR was just the idea of painting another skeleton army, because I've already got so many skeletons from my vampire counts, Soulblight Gravelords. But this list doesn't have any. Just they're all on mounts or on a giant crawler or whatever.
Yeah. This is very much a Ryan list. It's fast, it's techy, it's got some shooting that's really overbearing if it gets to do what it wants to do. It's got a little deep striking, and it's not many models. I love not having a lot of models.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and then I oh, thanks. I included one other list in here just to get a Catacross list on the report. I called it a Ludicrous. It's Mortison Council for the same reason I mentioned before, to get that +1 to cast for your 1 Soul Mason here, who's a 2 caster. So you are still getting at least 2 casts here. And I took a Kronspine just to mix it up. So I wanted to lean into, this is a bit more of a meme, the best kind of Catacross list. It's also 2,000 points. Catacross is doing everything we already said he would be doing. We still have one Mortek Crawler in here. I guess this is the list where I swapped that out. I was thinking about taking 10 Mortek Guard and 10 Turretic Cohort, but you'll see with the way that the rest of the list works that maybe this is... I wanted to lean into the elite side of this. So we've got a big block of 4 Morghast Archi, which we haven't talked about yet, and 2 units of 2 Morghast Harbingers. The Soul Mason's got Aura Sterility, which is the -1 to wound in shooting attacks, and Lotus Saturation is the 5+ ward, because I want to make sure he doesn't get sniped out, because he's your only caster. And he's real important. I'm not worried about Catacross dying, but I want to keep that guy alive. I thought about taking the -2 to charge, but if you... Basically, the strategy is you have the Archi that are always hanging around Catacross, and so between Catacross and the Archi, you're probably fighting off anything that gets into you, unless it's just a nightmare. Because go ahead and tap once on the slides, and we'll see the output for the Archi and the Harbingers. They have the same exact weapon profile, so they each have 6 wounds. So that's 24 wounds in a block of 4, or 12 in a block of 2. On a 4-up save for the Harbingers, or a 3-up save base for the Archi, which means with Catacross's +1 to save, they're always sitting on a 2-up. He's on a 2-up. The Soul Mason can be on a 2-up, or you could put it on the Crawler, or whatever you want to put him up to a 3. Each one of the Morghast units has 3 attacks, no champion, so just flat 3. 3s to hit, 2s to wound, -2 rend, but +1 against monster, and 3 damage with crit 2 hits. You use the Soul Mason to give the big block of 4 Archi crits on 5s, so they're just wiping things out. You don't need the +1 to wound, so you're always going for the +1 or 5-up ward in the combat phase. And then obviously it's worth blowing up all attack to just make sure those hits go through. If you're going into monsters for some reason, you're extra good, but you could also use Aura Sterility. Drain Vitality to do -1 to hit, -1 save, so that's bumping them up. It's like you're getting them up to 4 rend. I thought about putting an Ossiarch in the list, because he can also give one of these units +1 rend, but it's only on a 3-up, and I just couldn't figure out how to work him into a list like this. The primary difference between the Archi and the Harbingers, even though the Archi do have an ability to give +1 to cast, so we could get that Soul Mason up to +2 to cast, is that the Harbingers each have a 3d6 charge, which means you take the 2 separate units and send them out to your flanks. And then they can quickly come back to the middle after doing that objective or whatever they had to do. They also have one of them per turn can receive a Relentless Discipline ability, even if they're outside of the bubble. So you can give them one of Catacross's abilities, probably because they don't need the +1 to wound, probably +1 to charge if you don't think 3d6 is enough, or you're using +2 to move to get them a little bit up the field, or you're doing, but maybe they were already standing near him when you used it, or lastly, probably the 5+ ward. And so they actually work pretty independently as unique agents to go out, and they're kind of acting like elite versions of the Turretic Cohort in this situation. And I said that the control score can bump up to 43 because Catacross is projecting that 18-inch Holy Then bubble at +3 control score for each of your units, which is really necessary for an army with this few models. But anyway, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, once again, big fan, obviously, because it has such a low model count. I find it fun that none of your 3 lists has any foot guys in there. It's just all these big things. It's so much fun. I love the Archi. They're an amazing model. I remember them coming out when it was still Warhammer Fantasy and the end times were happening, and we got our first god model in the form of Nagash. And then combine that with Catacross, a lot of cool stuff going on here. The Harbingers being so easy to get into combat with their 3d6 charge, and then being able to tag them with your retreat and charge with the 18-inch bubble from Catacross seems like such a cool thing to do. Very cool list once again. I love the inclusion of the 1 crawler there.
Yeah, I mean, you could put some of the ground guys just to have a little bit more screens. But the Archi are on a 2+ save 5-up ward pretty easily and slap back real hard. And Catacross is not bad in combat. He's just not 500 points worth. So the crawler is obviously giving more output and then a little bit more range. It's also giving strike last to help keep those Harbingers alive if they go out into the field. Mm-hmm. I will admit, though, I've played a few games with those Morghast units. They die too easily. They cost too many points for how tanky they are. Yeah. I think they should be on a 3-up, 2-up if we're going to keep them the same everything else. or they need to go down in points, because right now they just cost way too much for what they're worth. And if they do raise the price on Death Riders anytime soon, I can tell you we're going to have a real power vacuum in the army where there's nothing that's putting the output out and that can also stay alive. So you're going to need to see a compensating balancing out factor of bringing the Archai down, or at least making Immortus Guard and Necropolis Guard more interesting to take.
Yeah.
So
I'm happy to see less Immortus Guard for a while, though, to be honest.
I mean, they're mainly used for the +1 to save, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
Or +1 ward, I mean. But anyway, that's all of my army list. Let's go to look at the conclusion stuff, and I think we'll be done at a good time here. So
yeah, just in time.
Yeah, internal and external balance. Do you have any thoughts about this before we? Obviously, you don't know the whole situation.
Yeah, externally, I don't have that a good view, but internally, it feels like you've got a little bit of everything going on. Especially for a shooting army where you usually don't have any death army where you usually don't have any shooting. You guys are kind of the exception to that. You have strong magic, you do have decent shooting, you have decent melee, you have some fast units, you have a bunch of slow units, obviously, but you're decently tanky as well. As long as the Death Riders don't get nerfed into the ground, I do feel like internally, externally, the army appears to be in a good place. Internally, though, I think I would agree with you that the Death Riders are kind of overshadowing some other units. But then if they become too expensive, then, as you said, which unit is going to fill up that vacuum?
Yep. Yeah. So, I mean, there are a couple of different places we could look for things that need a little love. I've already mentioned a couple just then, but the Gothazar Harvester isn't really pulling its weight, I think, right now, even though it's a cool model.
Yeah.
The Mortek Guard, to me, don't exactly have a great home because it's such an elite army that I don't really understand taking too many of them. The foot heroes have the same exact problem. All the foot heroes are good, by the way, but they have the same problem we see in all the other indexes, is that if you're worried about drops, or like that they can't be Italics heroes, it really just limits what you want to bring, especially considering how good the Mortarks are, or the War Masters are. And then, like I said, I think the hammers are going to really suffer if we raise the price of the Kavalos Death Riders. I think they should go up in price for what it's worth.
Yeah.
I just want them to make the rest balanced out.
Yeah.
In terms of external stuff, it goes back to that. The fact that we do have some variety in the lists is good, but they're all based around at least some amount of Death Riders, and that's the part that's not externally balanced, I guess. And the army is pretty good. Like it performs within, it's like a 4-1-5-0 kind of army, if you're in the right hands. So it might be because of the Death Riders too strong, but I think as soon as the Death Riders become less viable, it goes back to being middle of the pack.
Yeah.
Impact on the meta, same. Yeah, that's basically the same idea.
That is the impact. Yeah.
I think. I don't know. I do think OBR plays fair Warhammer, though, all things considered.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it doesn't warp anything about the game, right? It just takes everything from the game and does it well, but it doesn't really, change the way the Warhammer is played. It feels very fair, as you just said.
Yeah, it's no Night Haunt with like being unrendable and having all the other crap that it has, or like, it doesn't feel oppressive like maybe a Tzeentch or a Varangard list. I'm not saying it can't feel oppressive, but I think it's got its weak points, and there's always a way to work around it. It just might be a little too rock paper scissorsy for some lists, but I feel like it's got enough downsides to not just feel oppressive. Do you have any closing thoughts?
I like how you, at the start of this video, you compared them to undead elves, because it does feel that way. And you can see its effectiveness, because sure, you don't get all the speed that elves usually do, but you get a different bonus, and that's tankiness. And that's something that usually elves lack, and you can really see how it shines with those boons added on top of those nice profiles from with 3+ to hits and 4+ to wound. Sure. Apart from that, I love how a lot of the big models are viable. You made 3 lists, each list having at least one of those big models included, the big heroes. I hope we get to see a return to a little bit more of a resurrection kind of list, because I do remember the beginning of the OBR book where resurrection was such a big part of it, and has been throughout the editions, at least in some shape or form. And I really hope for all the OBR players that love that kind of recursion mechanic that they get something in return now, because it feels like that's almost forgotten now.
That's fair. Yeah, Nagash is really the only way to really get a meaningful.
And that's fine, because it used to be a Soulblight thing, and then it became a Ossiarch thing, and Ossiarch was better at everything compared to Soulblight. So I can see them differentiating the death armies there, but that battle formation just doesn't cover it for the players that want to have a recursion army, right?
Yeah, I would say in general, if you're a player out there that likes the an elite army with a lot of tactical flexibility, and death horde armies aren't really your thing, I think this is a fantastic army to choose.
Yeah.
If anyone remembers back when I did my battle tome, how to break down a battle tome, I did it on OBR because it was an army I didn't know that well, and they had a battle tome that came out around that time, and I kept myself intentionally in the dark, and then you guys got to see how I went through a battle tome on my own, and it's kind of poetic justice that now it's one of my favorite armies. So anyway, I love it. Let's go ahead and hit that closing slide, and we'll get us out of here. Guys, thank you so much for checking this out. I can't wait to put out the videos for every single unit. We'll be doing 3 of those, I think. And it's going to be fun. It'll be just like I did it in the Ineth series, and then like what we kind of did with Lumineth as well, with all the output and tactical thoughts on each unit and how I rank each one. So keep an eye out for that. And then maybe I'll come back to the shooting stuff sometime soon. But anyway, until the next time, Jonas, do you want to get us out of here?
Yeah, guys, please leave a comment and a like, or a lament, if you will. Ryan has put so much effort into these things. You know that by now, that he's the mathematician guy, but he also did the entire PowerPoints once again. So thank you so much, Ryan, and please show your love to him. He's been working very hard on the channel while I have been away for a little bit, it feels like. So I'm really happy that you're still there to put out the content, Ryan, and encourage me to take part.
Happy to do it. I'm so glad you came along instead of me just talking to the screen for 2 hours.
We'll see you guys in the next one then, I guess. If you want to talk to us, you can find us in the Discord, obviously. And please do subscribe and share this video around to show us some love. See you next one.